Hello and welcome to today's session on online coaching on choosing a negative argument for this year's topic. Let me say a few things off the top. I know I might look a little purple right now. A few people have told me that, that's what the computer lighting does. But also I'm looking for other feedback other than I look purple. Tell me how you think these are working, what else I could do to make them better. But with that, let me get to talking a little bit about picking a negative on this year's topic. I think there's a few things to keep in mind when you're choosing a strategy for the negative. Keep something that allows you to work consistently with a certain set of arguments, right? You may not want to just have, you may want to not have the whole file, all of the 20 files or whatever printed out. Instead, what you want to do is you want to choose a few things that you can get to know really well. We have mostly in our files right now, we have critiques. I think that a lot of these will engage a lot of the parts of the topic pretty well. And at the beginning of the year when things are unpredictable and you haven't had a chance yet to do case research, I think that these critiques will be relatively useful. I think one effective strategy is the one that is called TKO. That was taught to me by some of my friends in Wyoming. What it basically means is that in every round you run a topicality argument, a critique, and some on-case argumentation. Now, I think that the benefits of this strategy are that it gives you flexibility and it gives you choices going into the debate. You can keep a few things that you work on and update, but other things that you sort of use consistently. I think that's one very good strategy to approach it with. I think another strategy is the big K sort of strategy, where you come at an argument with just one critique and you make the whole debate about that. I think there are several files, including Marxism and Empire, that you can easily do that with in this file set right now, and I think that that can be an effective strategy. What that means what happens in that debate is that you oftentimes end up having a very big debate about the critique, and you have to go through a lot of theory, and you still need to figure out a way to focus on case. The third way of doing it is a sort of counterplan disadvantage and case approach. I think that this approach is well supported by the files that we have this year, and this is a good way to also have stuff that you use relatively frequently. The last way is to sort of just straight turn the case or to defend the status quo. I think that that's going to be harder to do at the beginning of the season when the AFs have had the time to do some sort of predictable research and things like that. So what you're going to want to build toward that. Ultimately, the goal with negative strategy is that as the season goes on, you're going to want to have specific strategies against specific cases, but the negative strategies that you have are the things that you know that you can execute in a round when you may not have specific stuff, or when somebody may be trying something very small or very big. So the strategies are your way of controlling what you have to debate. If the AF is taking you way far afield into something that is not what you want to be debating about, then you can use parts of the strategy in order to engage that and save most of your on-case debating for the stuff that you feel is in your comfort zone. Now, with that being said, I want to go through some of the specific arguments that we have. The first is the Arab-Muslim stereotyping critique. I think that this is very good for times when people are conflating Arab people with Muslim people. It forgets about the fact that there are Christian people and Jewish Arab people, and it engages in sort of an ethnocentrism and stereotyping that leads to a lot of bad things and leads to a failure to understand. I also think that it's a good argument to have a few of these cards for terrorism arguments, to criticize connections between Arab and Muslim identities and terrorism. That goes in well to the next argument, which is terror talk. This argument is a critique that criticizes this framing of discussion around terrorists because it forecloses the outcome a little bit. I think that you can use this as some of your on-case negative evidence. When you find some of these critiques that you like that have some stuff but aren't the position you want to spend your whole time on, you can use them for on-case evidence. We also have the cellularity file and the borders file. These are two files that criticize the notion of the nation state as the political actor that should be engaged, and call for engagement with people and movements and sub-national entities. I think that both of these criticisms work well as a one-off type of criticism or as a part of a TKO strategy. There's also an interesting position called captivity, which has narratives of captivity narratives from people who were enslaved during the slave trade, and some of them chose to go with their African Islamic captors, and some of them chose to stick to their Eurocentric ways. And it discusses how people come to know the other. That's a pretty good argument. It goes along well with an argument called Orientalism. This is the work of Edward Said, who's a very prominent philosopher. You'll hear a lot of him on this topic. His basic argument is that the way that we represent and construct the Middle East and the people who live there and the things that go on there occurs in a way in which we assume that they're different than us, in which we assume that they are an other. Now, with we being the self and they being the other, we then begin to project ideas and identities onto them, and we foster certain outcomes. Said says that this is what leads to conquest and domination, and that it's the fundamental mindset we have to challenge before we can begin to really understand how to deal with those that we've created as the other. Now, there is also an argument called Matisyahu. This argument criticizes apocalyptic images and representations of Israeli security. This is a case argument that you'll want to use in a few cases where they say things like, and if we don't solve this, then Israel will lash out with nuclear weapons, or things like that. Things that either construct Israel as something that is sacred to be protected at all costs, or construct Israel as something that is an irrational political actor that will upset peace in the region. This stuff criticizes and interferes with the effectiveness of making those arguments. Now, the other arguments, the last two of the last Ks are the Empire critique and the Marxism K. The Empire critique develops the arguments of Antonio Hart and Michael Negri. No, other way around. Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, who are two philosophers who argue that it's no longer the nation state that is necessarily the thing that we have to worry about and resist against, yet it's the flow of international capital and the sort of worldwide globalization system. This position criticizes the notion of constructive engagement and works well on the idea that there might be that economic incentives are what it would our economic incentives would be useful in luring countries. This would be a good thing to link against foreign assistance, but also against security guarantee critiques. The Marxism argument challenges the method in which foreign policy is made. It says that most foreign policy is made in a way that it only helps the elites and only takes the interest of political and economic elites into account. And it calls for a new politics that is a bottom-up politics and a people-centered politics in which we engage with material reality and material conditions, and not sort of the false notion of the elite congressman making policy for others. The last criticism is a realism good argument, and I think that this can be a good argument to use against critical AFs that may try to redefine foreign policy or make a new foreign policy, because it says that we must evaluate state-to-state affairs for the very real and difficult political game that they are, and that we can't simply fall back into the abstractions of what we would like foreign policy to be, because that's not how everybody else is playing it. So this argument is really useful against things that might try to reinterpret parts of the topic, or change foreign policy, or make grand sweeping pronouncements. Okay, we also have some disadvantages and some counterplans available. First, let's start with the disadvantages. There's an oil disad. This argument says that the price of oil might fluctuate as a result of the plan actions, like with Iran or Iraq, and that price is directly tied to things that go on in other countries like Nigeria. There's also a politics argument that says that the plan would be unpopular or popular and would cost Bush some credibility, and if he loses or gets that credibility, it will influence his likelihood to strike Iran. Finally, there's three consultation counterplans. These are arguments that say that before you do the plan, you should ask another country what their stance on it is, and argue that the relations between the United States and those countries are harmed if you don't ask them. The counterplan competes because it makes you ask the question of whether or not, or because there's a possibility that the other country would say no to the plan. The three countries are Israel, Russia, and China. Israel is obvious because almost all conflicts in the region involve Israel, and U.S.-Israeli relations would suffer if the United States engaged Iran without talking to Israel first. Russia sees the Middle East as a strategic sphere of influence, and if the United States started messing around in it, it might upset the Russians, and similar with the Chinese. Okay. That's a quick 10-minute overview to the arguments we have already. Look through them and choose a negative strategy so you know what you're going to be debating in the next few weeks. In the next few weeks, we'll go through each of them in more depth and work on developing them into better and better arguments. But that's the rundown of what they are, and you should be able to start putting together a negative strategy for next weekend's tournament, September 15th and 16th. Thank you.